Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Meter Cute interviews here on Meter and Mayhem. Today, I'll be chatting with Thomas Bevilacqua, a writer and teacher who holds a PhD in English literature from Florida State University and teaches English at the McClay School in Tallahassee, Florida. He's the author of Golden Age, The Brilliance of the 2018 Champion Golden State Warriors, for all you basketball fans out there, and he has a new book out there that he co-authored with Robert K. Elder called Mythbusting Hemingway, Debunking Hemingway Myths and Celebrating the Extraordinary Stories of His Life. Sound interesting? I think so too. So let's sit back, relax, and get ready to fall in love.
Okay, I'm going to read my introduction to Mythbusting Hemingway entitled Puncturing the Windbags, Getting to the Heart of What Matters About Ernest Hemingway. When I think about Ernest Hemingway and the tall tales associated with him, my mind returns to the time in my life when I first critically engaged with the author's work. Like so many others, my initial entry into Hemingway's writing came in high school with The Sun Also Rises. I was swept up in that libertine world of 1920s Paris and Hemingway's stripped down, no nonsense prose style that mirrored the toughness of his protagonist, Jake Barnes, and later, as further reading would reveal, Frederick Henry in A Farewell to Arms. This created an image, no caricature of Hemingway in my young mind, as the model for the literarily inclined man or boy who wanted to be a man. It loomed large in my thoughts as I traversed different periods in literary history, painting in primary colors and thus lacking in real nuance. As I began my graduate studies in English, conceiving of myself not just as an enjoyer of literature, but also a scholar of it, my eye returned to Hemingway as one whose work I wanted to explore. Here was a chance to build on my enjoyment of his writing and to transform that genuine interest into more scholarly inquiry. I remember one of my professors during that time in graduate school, Barry Main at Wake Forest University, making a point that took apart that broad, simplistic image of Hemingway I had in my mind, something that desperately needed to happen. We were discussing A Farewell to Arms and a course on World War I in American literature and visual art. Professor Main alluded to the fact that people always think they would like to go out and have a drink with Hemingway. They'd want Papa to be their carousing companion, out with them for a night on the town. However, Professor Main continued, given Hemingway's personality and his characteristics, they wouldn't enjoy that experience all that much. He was short-tempered, prone to insults and cruel jabs if you did not go along with what he said. Professor Main was trying to get us, a mixed group of graduates and undergraduate students, away from the prepackaged conception of Hemingway as some kind of literary equivalent of Dos Equis' most interesting man in the world, advertising character. He wanted to remove that illusion, bust that myth, if you will, so that we could spend our time thinking about what really mattered with Hemingway, his writing. I thought I was immune to this thinking, but the realization sank in. I too had this image of Hemingway as the larger than life cartoon character, the one who would take you out on a rollicking night on the town and then soon afterward go out to hunt for wild animals or catch a great fish. While there were actual reasons why this view of Hemingway was so prevalent in people's minds, the historical and biographical records clearly show that Hemingway's voracious alcohol consumption was a fact. It was a distortion that went beyond what the author was like to create something unreal. What I came to realize was that puncturing that image did not take away from the majesty and importance of the writing. As I read the ending of Farewell to Arms, the Hemingway novel assigned for that course, there was no change in my reaction from the previous times I'd read that novel. The profound pain and despair of Frederick Henry as he loses both his beloved Catherine and their child, describing how it quote, was like saying goodbye to a statue and walk back to the hotel in the rain, end quote, were crushing. I was sitting in the front desk of our writing center at Wake Forest. After I read those pages, I had to step away for a moment as that pain overwhelmed me and I needed a moment alone to compose myself to be ready to greet students who were looking for help with their assignments. Having this veil pulled from over my eyes did not diminish what I found so powerful in Hemingway's work. In fact, it made me appreciate it even more. I return to that moment when it comes to the myths surrounding Hemingway. So much of what comes to mind when we talk about Hemingway is that mythos. It's easier to engage with the tall tale than with the man himself in all his complexity. I've also noticed that the Hemingway with myth keeps people from picking up his writing that might go a long way in dispelling some of those reductive notions of who he was. For a writer like Hemingway, who has done so much to change our notions of literature and articulated so well issues of pain and suffering and grief and trauma and love and loss, it is a true shame that the work gets overlooked because of what the myth has done. In Authors Inc., Literary Celebrity in the Modern United States, 1880 to 1980, Lauren Glass writes that, quote, no author of authorial celebrity in the modern United States would be complete, no study of authorial celebrity in the modern United States would be complete without a consideration of the career of Ernest Hemingway, end quote. Glass makes a particular note of Hemingway's, quote, worldwide public image as Papa, the indestructible U.S. sportsman and aficionado who became a veritable paradigm of masculinity in the American cultural imaginary. The public personality that Hemingway developed has been an embarrassment for literary critics, end quote. This mythos, particularly as it emerged into a more modern media environment able to greatly amplify and distort, was able to run amok and create a myriad of problems for those looking to perform serious considerations of Hemingway. That Papa caricature of Hemingway, which sold men's magazines and exotic travel and liquor and firearms and on, with an albatross hung around the necks of serious literary scholars who wish to engage with Hemingway's literature in a serious way. All this is frustrating on two counts. The first is that Hemingway, the man himself, was plenty interesting even when stripped of the exaggerated elements. Perhaps his feats and actions were not as grand as the imaginary Papa who is so prominent in people's minds, but he's still one of the most fascinating figures in American history. He was friends with many of the great celebrities of his time, Ingrid Bergman, Ava Gardner, Orson Welles, Marlene Dietrich, Gary Cooper, and did meet some of the famous historical figures too, Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Fidel Castro. One does not need tall tales to make Hemingway's life fascinating to the observer. Perhaps even more than that, this focus on the image of Hemingway that's been peddled keeps us from appreciating Hemingway for his most important contribution to the world, his writing. Because of the assumptions based on the myth of Hemingway, we say to ourselves, oh, I wouldn't really like whatever he had to write. This is where that element of embarrassment Glass describes comes into play. Those who might further the true appreciation of Hemingway, who might create scholarship that better analyzes or contextualizes his work, are put off of Hemingway because of this cartoon conception of the author they've been fed. It would be embarrassing to spend one's time and energy studying an author with this kind of image, and thus they pass. This is why, as tempting as it is to say, these are just silly stories, they don't really matter when it comes to Hemingway's literary reputation, we cannot stop there, since they function as impediments to true and full engagement with Hemingway's oeuvre. Other authors suffered from this as well. I think of someone like Jack Kerouac as one whose reputation as an author has been irrevocably damaged because of the image put forth of him. But the myths that surrounding Hemingway have done the most damage and have had the most outsized effect. These myths are not new. They've been a part of Hemingway discourse from its very inception. Biographer Carlos Baker sent a letter to Hemingway near the end of the author's life, articulating why he wanted to write a biography of Hemingway, someone who was notoriously distrustful of biographers and literary critics. As I think about Mythbusting Hemingway, Baker's words ring in my ears and push me to do this work. In his letter, Baker writes, quote, I would like to destroy the legend, puncture the windbags, clear the air a little, and show your achievements in something like its true dimensions. There has been enough malice and lying and misunderstanding. Baker speaks in words that resonate with Hemingway, destroy and puncture, conveying the action and the force in which Hemingway was perennially interested. Obviously, more important in that statement is Baker's desire to sideline the legend as a way of showing Hemingway's achievements in something like its true dimensions. This project is not about diminishing or denigrating, but rather removing all that is not true, because what is true is even more special. The man and his work are enough. There does not need to be a legend to obscure the feats achieved by the man himself. The work Baker began with his scholarship continues to this day, so much so that one can imagine a modern biographer of Hemingway saying something almost the same as Baker more than 50 years after the both the biographer and critic wrote those words. What this book aims to do is to address those myths, which so many assume to be the truth about Hemingway before we engage with the real him. These are the things that have become calcified in our collective imaginations and prevent many of us from having a true engagement with one of the greatest authors writing in the English language. Some of these myths will be debunked and proven to be just that, myth. Others might be proven to be true. Examples of those spaces where myth and reality line up. But what is important is to get beyond those myths and distortions so that we can appreciate Hemingway and his stellar work unencumbered. Thank you.
Wow, Tom, I really enjoyed listening to you talk about Hemingway. I think one thing I enjoyed the most is the mixture between the scholarly sources and the personal take on stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's kind of why I was drawn to reading this, because I think it's this, moment where we can think about how something personal can drive, what we're interested in actually studying. The bulk of the book has been rigorously researched. It is looking at the record and the data on Hemingway, what's there, but it does come like when I think about why I took to this project, I think it was because I had that experience and I thought about that. And I thought about how how that had been challenged and how I wanted to challenge that myth, because I both had sort of presented to me and seen that even if you didn't have it, look, those books still hit. Even if you don't think Hemingway is the most interesting man in the world, if you just think he's a great American author, like I said, the end of Farewell to Arms, it's just as powerful, all that stuff. So it's fun to kind of show that how that personal experience gets the ball rolling, and then it's like, okay, now we go into this scholarly discourse and think about how what we experience can kind of meld into that.
Now you have a PhD in literature. Was your dissertation focusing on Hemingway, and were you able to use any of that, or this is something completely different?
So my dissertation did not focus on Hemingway. I did, and I mentioned him in that introduction. My dissertation did have a chapter on Kerouac, another author who had to deal with this mythos and what it did to his literary reputation. But so like my interest was in the mid 20th century, and so but to that point, that was by the point when the myth of Hemingway, because that was all that was left after he died. So that and like seeing authors engage with it or having to reckon with it or rejecting Hemingway as an influence because the myth is all that's been left. It's something that really I saw it like kind of in the history of the time I worked more in, but my master's I did in part on Hemingway. But like I said, it's a weird relationship with him because I'm sort of a mid-centuryist, but I have this sort of tie to Hemingway as well. But he lives on so much in the mid-century that it somehow fits too.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole notion of the literary forefathers and things like that. So I think that's
Yeah. And I mean, even if you think about, like I said, the 1950s, the 1960s, and like the kind of rise of, I mean, Hemingway wrote for, Esquire existed in the was a magazine that existed in the 30s, but I think about the kind of that and like of a kind of masculinity that I think again Hemingway, or that idea of Hemingway, like was affecting, and the way it was being conceived of was very much influenced by Hemingway or that myth of Hemingway. So he's still there and present, even if he's not actually there, actually writing, or a writer of that time.
So speaking of writers and influence the writers have, I'm wondering what writer has caused the most mayhem for you?
Well, though I mean, there are two. I mean, it's like on the one hand, I certainly could talk like I wrote a book about Hemingway. He certainly has done that in my life, but the author I do think about again, who I mentioned, and I know this again, and sort of in the same way that Hemingway, he's another author who has become a kind of a cliche for young, or for I'm certainly not young now, wasn't for a while, but like men who are literary inclined, and that's like I said, I mentioned Jack Kerouac, and the reason why I guess I would say he's the one who caused the most mayhem is because when I think about and I've written about why I kind of cared this much about literature, I think about reading on the and having it kind of flip this switch to where, okay, I didn't just enjoy literature. I wasn't just good at taking English classes. It was like, okay, this is something that I want to invest in and invest myself in and to further the study of. And and when I think about where that impulse has led me in my life, and I think about a word like mayhem, I think there's a way in which it's like, oh, by reading this book, it totally knocked me off probably some nice, some, I don't know, we have to say easier, but more straightforward path. And instead I got a PhD. All this stuff where it's like, there are days where I'm like, choosing to do this feels a little bit like mayhem. But that was the book in the moment where, like I said, where I kind of that shift happened and where I said, okay, like I said, I don't want to just do this or use this study of literature and writing as a stepstone. It is the thing I want to do or I want to be. And like I said, in high school, like I love, my English classes in high school. I love reading Hemingway in high school. I knew I wanted to major in it, but that was the thing that it was like, okay, you're going to, it became a vocation. And like I said, and that I just, maybe disruptive is a kind of a loaded word, but it affected the course of the rest of my life. And so when I think about that question, and I can kind of point to when I read that novel when I was starting at the University of Texas, and I've been on that path ever since. And yes, there's times where it went more into I was spending more time with Hemingway, and there are times where it's been more, other Flannery O'Connor in my dissertation, or Walker Percy. But that kind of kickstarted it. And so when I think about the spirit of that question, that's the author and the book that I would think of. And I know it's like I said, it's a cliche to end all cliches, but and I know I'm wearing my Dead and Co shirt. It's just like, of course I would say that, but that's what it is. Like, I can't deny that.
Well, I mean, at least you didn't say Catcher in the Rye. That would have been even, the stereotypes, that would have been the bigger one. So
yeah, and it's one I teach it to my high school students, and I have fun with them, and they're sensing their annoyance at Holden, and it's like, and I've gone back and I've read that book, and I'm like, yeah, you need to. That one you can really only kind of you can only be in it when you're that age, because even like I go back and reread it, and it's good and I enjoy teaching it, but I'm like, man, like dude, you gotta chill out. Like you gotta take it easy.
I think that reading that book, the biggest thing that I remember, like I get images in my head from like when I've read books, but for that book, a phrase stands out. It was, and I'm pretty sure it was Catcher in the Rye, the phrase "making time." That was the first thing where I was like, what does this phrase mean? And I looked it up,
Yeah.
and I was like, oh, well, I never.
that yeah, or well, that's like I think one of like I know before I do it, I talk a little bit about the slang and there that time. And I think I have an example of like chewing the fat, and I think I'm like I explain it to them like, oh, I mean, and again, like to see it through the eye of like the high school student out there, like, what are you talking about? Like, where does this come from? And I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, it's but then I'm like, then I'll say like, look, there's stuff you guys are saying that the next generation will be like, why are you guys saying mid and no cap? Like, what does that mean?
What
So
is Riz?
yeah.
So I feel like Riz is going to be one of those that sticks around. Like sometimes something will stick.
Yeah.
I think Riz has enough of sort of a natural progression from charisma that I think that one's also I
Mm.
like it a lot. I think that one's going to be with us a while.
Okay, I could do that. It's like one of the few joys that one can have is when I drop when I say something about Riz and watch them be like what, like their like minds get blown. Like, yes, no, I understand how slang works, and like I might think it's ridiculous, but I'm also going to make you like confront it too. The same thing with how many you say bro every third word. It's amazing. Like, bro, everyone is. I mean, maybe it's a sign of a great kind of unification that's happening, but
Yeah. I mean, when I was back in my day, but it was dude. Everything was
yeah,
dude. So, I like to keep that train going with a dude train. But
yeah,
I understand where they're putting in bro, I guess. Or
yeah.
bra.
But bruh. I'll every once in a while I'll overhear a student say that, and I'll just keep saying it like louder and just make them aware of how much they are, and they'll be like, okay, we get it, we say it a lot. I'm like, okay, just making you aware of your like linguistic choices. Like you can broaden the scope of your vocabulary, like, but now we're not going to do that.
So, are you ever able to teach on the road to your students, or is that a little bit
Um,
advanced for them in terms of
um,
subject matter?
that's a good question. I mean, I don't. It might be a little too much for mine. I mean, but catching the ride is not too far from it. I think it's actually. I know it's on the reading list for the rising seniors. Like it's a book they could choose to read for a summer assignment. So it's in there. It might be a little bit much for something like I said. I'm teaching the younger ones. It might be a little bit much for them. Just because like I think that, again in the way where it's kind of like the I don't know to get that it's I don't know it's more than just a book about people driving across the country and trying to get some. I think you do need a little age, a little perspective, a little experience, and like I think what we do. It's I mean I think you get a little of it. We do the outsiders, so you're kind of talking about the greasers and in Catcher in the Rye, I talk about 50s society and the kind of idea of rebellion. So I bring up the beats and Kerouac, but I think just like and it's not like in a content way, but it's just more of a I don't I think they like I probably wouldn't. I might like maybe when a kid, somebody who's done, really put in the work in my class as a freshman, if they get to be a senior, I've done this. I've been like, yeah, you should read On the Road. It's a great novel, and it's this great piece, kind of a kind of America, and talking about it. But at the age I teach, I think, I think it just would be. I don't like I said, it's not like an above their heads, but I would see that being difficult for
Yeah.
them to just wrap their minds around, or to see what the big deal is, because they're when you're old, when you're a senior, you are thinking about going, you're moving on, and so like something like that would speak to it. When you're a freshman, you're still in this contained world, and so that's those kinds of narrative. I think the first time I tried to read it was as a sophomore in high school, and I didn't it just didn't click. And then I went back when I was in college, and I was like, oh, now I get it. Like it was interesting, and I cared about what he was showing, and the kind of meaning of experience of going out there and what you can find and how you can shape yourself and the sort of these all these ideas. But when I was a sophomore in high school and kind of living a very contained life that you do when you're that age, I just was like, what? Like, he drove it, and it didn't click.
Well, speaking about your younger self, I'm
Mhm,
curious to know what advice, if you could get in a time machine and go back to some earlier version of Tom, what
mhm.
advice would you give to him?
um, I would probably say to not this is not care so much
Mm,
about, and specifically about what others or what you think you have to do or you have to be. Because when I think back on a lot of the ways the choices I made, the things I've done, where I am, and I'll look back and it'll be a lot of like, oh, I wish I'd done that thing, or I try whatever it is. Sometimes it was like it was a class. Oh, I wish I'd taken that class. And sometimes it might be, who you choose to spend time with. Sometimes it might be the thing you choose to go to. And I think that those younger versions of myself were just a little bit too hung up on like, okay, no, I'm this person. I need to do this thing. I need to be this way, whether it's because it's what like I mean, it's like either it's like what a family expected, or it's just what I thought I had to be. It kind of came from anywhere, but I mean, I think about like how and like thinking about being like, I didn't really like. I think about it a lot with writing, and like, yeah, I kind of got steered into the sort of the academic, the lit crit side. But I don't like as I've gotten to this point, I'm like, I don't think I maybe really wanted to do that, or this was the right thing. And I think when it started earlier, and it was like, okay, no, you need to be this kind of person, and this is what you would do, and not letting myself explore the other paths, even if I knew, okay, I want to be engaged in the literary world in some way, whatever that means, sort of the biggest way. But just I kind of blocked myself off and didn't follow this thing. So I think if I went back, I'd say like just kind of do what don't let yourself get held back by what you think others are expecting of you. And yeah.
So, if I'm following what you're saying, part
Mhm.
of what it sounds like is that there were sort of myths about who writers were or what writers were that prevented you from following that path, or was I
Yeah,
mistake?
I mean, I think there is some of that there, and like and kind of like this is what it would mean. And yeah, there's a little of that. Or I also think there's I mean, I think like what could also go with it is that I was like another thing I would maybe or would say is don't be too serious, because I think I went in with the very like kind of approach that was like, okay, like in a very more buttoned up, in a kind of way. And it's just like, again, like if there's something that you're like, okay, I'm kind of interested in it, and I want to put myself out there, and I want to try something, being comfortable or do that and allow yourself to challenge. I don't know it is whether it's like the ideas of yourself or just challenge yourself in whatever way, but to kind of follow that through again, instead of being like, okay, I'm this kind of person, and so this is the kind of thing I do. I think it's a lot of it. Like when I think about it, it's about like this like professionalization. It's like, okay, I have to find something that's very, again, like that can be explained or is very professional, like or very sort of utilitarian. And there are times I wish I made more choices and done things that were in the name of just kind of because I want to do it, because I like to see if I could do it.
Like, did you ever, I just realized I'm not exactly sure how old you are, and so what I'm
Mhm.
about to say kind of dates me a little bit. Um,
Mhm.
so did you ever follow the dead? I mean, you've got your dead shirt. Did you ever let yourself go out and
No,
follow the dead?
I mean, no. By the time like Garcia had died by the time I could have ever done something like that. But I mean, like, yeah, something like that. I mean, or like I mean, I think about how I went undergrad, master's, PhD. I just went straight through, and maybe I would have benefited from time in between. Maybe I would have, whatever that is. And but I think, and like, going out and I don't know whether it's like literally like, yeah, doing something like, oh yeah, it'd be cool to like kind of go and follow a band around, do something like that, or if it's whatever it is. But yeah, it just I never let myself, like I said, I think that like that main line or streamline of undergrad, master's, PhD is that it's like that kind of thing. It's like you just went through and you were like, okay, I'm just gonna do this, and it's like I should have again kind of given myself the time to again to think and to think, oh, what do I really want to do, and yeah, I don't think, I just don't think, I mean, I think things have worked out well. It's just, I don't think that I would have maybe benefited from, like I said, like doing it with that, like kind of with a little bit more freedom or not feeling this kind of pressure to, again, to be like, I don't know what it is, to follow a certain path or to take certain steps or whatever.
Yeah, give yourself a little time to get to know yourself before you decide what the steps are.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas I felt like, and I think a lot of this was kind of self-driven. Like it was somehow in, but like was like just go, just like you say, like keep taking the steps instead of like realizing what steps I wanted to take and why I wanted to take them and what other steps there were to take too, and thinking about that and maybe maybe go heading to keep extending this metaphor, heading down the same path, but maybe like okay, there are going to be a few steps where it's like one of those trails where kind of they go and they have one that kind of goes like maybe around something and it goes, but then it gets back on the track or something like that. Like having that kind of, I don't know, but then yeah, like that freedom, or like I started saying, like okay, yeah, to like go, but yeah. Like I said, it's all this all feels very a very convoluted metaphor, but yeah.
So on that note, what talking about circling around and
Yeah.
paths and things, what advice do you think if a younger version of yourself could get in a time machine and just like shows up in your house right now, what
Mhm.
do you think, what do you think he would say? What advice do you think he would give you? Or
that's such a good question, and there's like this part of me that's like imagines the younger version and like seeing myself and being like just him being like you need to just rip it up and start all over because what have you done with us? But no, I mean, but in reality, I mean, it's funny that I feel like it. I mean, it's funny because I feel like it would be sort of the same advice. I'm imagining him like this younger version and saying, "Why are you so wrapped up in again who you're supposed to be? Like who like because you still feel that, and I feel like he would recognize that and say, okay." You need to, I mean, yeah, not to to use some like stereotypical slang, but like you need to chill out a little bit. You need to be a little bit, to like to kind of let go, and maybe to stop trying to to think about myself relative to other people, or to try to put my to not care. So, I guess it is kind of the same thing of like of what other people think. And it's funny because there's a way that there's like I think that means two things at different times in your life. When you're younger, it's a kind of, I think it's maybe a little bit more of a like this like like this society, maybe it's like your high school or whatever, and it's like or with the world around you and its parents. And I think as you get older, it becomes very like the kind of, whether it's like friends or peers and things like that, but just trying to think about, so it's like it's the same advice, but I think just saying it, where that pressure comes from is generated by different groups and different people. So I think now it would be like, you need to not worry about like where you are relative to where, you know, someone else your age or doing this or doing that, or what haven't you done, because you've done all of these things that seem pretty good. So don't try to let that affect you. I mean, honestly, it's like when you think about the difference, I think about, the younger me was not a social media wasn't as much of a thing, and there wasn't that constant like seeing how the other people are doing and what they're what they've done, how they live. And I think that I mean now you're just more engaged with that, and so it that becomes more of a factor. Whereas again, the younger me, I'm thinking about myself again, like in high school, it's kind of like, okay, it's the world of my family, parents, and the kind of the like the social scene of a high of that little bubble. That's where that pressure is coming from and getting you to do certain things or go a certain way. So it's like, it's funny, it's the same, it would probably be like you said, the same advice, it's just speaking to different things.
Oh. So as a high school teacher, do you feel like you're able to kind of give that advice to your students, or are they all already chill and following their own paths?
No, I mean, I think there is way, I mean, I see it, like there's way more pressure on some of these kids to what they have to do more, in terms of like advanced classes, things like that. So, I mean, I've tried to say to them, like, look, like, you want to do well, as well as you can, but also don't compromise on who you are and who you want to be, and trying to figure out what the path looks like for you to excel, but be true to yourself. um it's yeah, like you do, I mean, again, I think it's just harder in different ways now, I think, because it's not the same as like I see the differences and I notice the differences when I was in their position versus what they're going through now. And some of it I think is easier, and they have stuff, but there's also a lot of it that would be much more challenging. So I think it's you try, like you just try to not let it overwhelm them, to not let the pressure, the expectations push them down, and really kind of to be like this weight on them, to kind of be like, look, like to try to kind of like do the best you can, achieve, put yourself in the best position to succeed and do it, but then don't just be able to say that that's what the accomplishment is, that you're able to say that you've, again, like you've done as much as you could, and then you say the rest of it's going to kind of fall how it'll fall.
The joy is in the journey.
Yeah, no, I mean, but it like yeah, I mean that's where the meaning is found because then you get to the thing and then there's another journey to take and another journey and another journey. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I have really enjoyed this journey that we have taken here together today. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for coming and talking with me
Oh no.
about Hemingway and Kerouac and all that good stuff. Thank you so much.
Oh no, thank you. It was great to talk with you and be on here. I really enjoyed it.
What a fun interview that was. I hope you enjoyed listening as much as I enjoyed talking. You know, I've read a little bit of Hemingway and I've read a little bit of Kerouac, but um hearing Thomas talk about them really made me want to read a little bit more. Is that weird that now I switched to Thomas? I got all formal, even though in the interview I called him Tom. Um, Much like many of the people that I interview, I have been friends with him for I think 13 years. I think is maybe 12, but I think it's 13, which makes him one of my more recent friends. As you can tell when I'm interviewing people I've known for 30 years. So it's really great to be able to hear the things that your friends are interested in beyond just like, hanging out and what games they play or what's going on in the sports world. Although Tom has a book about the Golden State Warriors, right? 2018. So if you like sports and want to know what he thinks about that, you also can pick up that book as well as the book on Hemingway while you're, I was going to say out there at the bookstore. Maybe you're at a bookstore. You're probably getting it online, but maybe you're at a bookstore. I don't know these things. But you know what else you can do online? You can subscribe to his Substack, which you can find. I'll be putting it in links in descriptions. But you can also just go to thomasbevilacqua.substack.com. And thanks for stopping by.